What if Sidney Poitier's groundbreaking directorial debut almost never happened? Harry Belafonte intentionally rotted his teeth for his role, and the film was shot in two countries on opposite sides of the world? From a director fired after just days of filming to a future wife's game-changing advice, Buck and the Preacher hides bizarre production secrets, unusual casting choices, and strange historical details that transformed this revisionist Western into an unforgettable piece of cinema history. Fact 1. Sidney Poitier's future wife convinced him to fire the director. Sidney Poitier never planned to direct Buck and the Preacher, but his girlfriend, Joanna Shimkus, had other ideas. When production began in early 1971, the film had a perfectly capable director already at the helm, Joseph Sargent, an experienced television director who seemed like a safe choice for the project. But after just a few days of watching Sargent work, both Poitier and producer Harry Belafonte grew increasingly uncomfortable with the direction the film was taking. The problem wasn't technical competence, it was something far more fundamental. Sargent was treating Buck and the Preacher like a standard Western, complete with all the familiar genre conventions, but he wasn't capturing what Poitier and Belafonte felt was essential to the story, the authentic perspective of Black people fighting for freedom in the post-Civil War West. Poitier later explained that Sargent's approach lacked the important ethnic qualities that would allow Black people and minorities in general to find in the film a certain substance, a certain nourishment, a certain complement of the self. As tensions mounted on set, Poitier confided in Joanna Shimkus about his frustrations. She gave him surprisingly direct advice: take over the directing yourself. Poitier was hesitant at first, feeling he wasn't quite ready to step behind the camera, but Shimkus convinced him that this story was too important to leave in hands that couldn't fully understand its deeper significance. Her encouragement proved to be the push Poitier needed. He and Belafonte made the decision to fire Sargent, and Poitier assumed directorial control of what would become his debut as a filmmaker. Shimkus would later become Poitier's second wife in 1976, and her influence on one of his most important career decisions cannot be overstated. Fact 2. The film was shot in 3 separate locations on 2 continents. Most Westerns were shot in the American Southwest or on studio backlots, but Buck and the Preacher took an unusual international approach to its locations. The bulk of filming took place in Durango, Mexico, a popular location for Western productions that offered vast desert landscapes and lower production costs. The production company created an entire living complex in Durango to house the cast and crew during the shoot, turning the Mexican city into their temporary home base, but Durango wasn't the only filming location. According to studio publicity materials, the final sequence showing the freed slaves arriving at a lush green valley, representing their promised land, was actually filmed in Marysville, California, providing a stark visual contrast to the harsh desert terrain that dominated the rest of the movie. But here's where things get really interesting. According to production records, Buck and the Preacher was also filmed in Kenya, making it one of the only Western films to have footage shot on the African continent. The exact nature of what was filmed in Kenya remains somewhat unclear in historical records, but the decision to shoot on 3 separate locations across 2 continents was highly unusual for a Western made in 1972. This international filming approach added authenticity and visual variety to the story of Black migration, subtly connecting the African diaspora to the American frontier experience. The logistics of coordinating a production across Mexico, California, and Kenya must have been enormously complex, especially for a first-time director like Poitier. Yet somehow, the film came together seamlessly, with audiences never noticing the geographic leap between continents hidden within the frames of this groundbreaking Western. Fact 3. Harry Belafonte's wife learned Apache language at a museum. When Julie Robinson was cast as Cynthia Aue, the wife of a Native American chief who helps the freed slaves in their journey west, she faced an unusual challenge. Her character needed to speak authentic Mescalero Apache language. Robinson wasn't just any actress taking on this role, she was Harry Belafonte's real-life wife, a trained dancer who had performed with the Katherine Dunham Company before transitioning into acting. But speaking Mescalero Apache convincingly was something entirely different from her previous performance experience. Rather than faking the dialogue or relying on a dialect coach alone, Robinson took her preparation seriously. According to a May 15, 1972 article in Box Office magazine, she traveled to the American Indian Museum in New York and immersed herself in research, studying the language structure, pronunciation, and cultural context of the Mescalero Apache people. The Mescalero Apache are one of several Apache tribes historically located in what is now New Mexico and surrounding areas, and their language is part of the Athabascan language family. Robinson spent considerable time at the museum working to master the specific phrases and dialogue she would need for her scenes, ensuring her performance would carry authenticity rather than Hollywood stereotypes. This dedication to linguistic accuracy was relatively rare in 1972, when many films simply had actors deliver vaguely native-sounding dialogue without regard for actual tribal languages. Robinson's commitment to properly representing the language added a layer of respect to the film's portrayal of the alliance between Black migrants and Native Americans. It's worth noting that while Robinson's linguistic preparation was admirable, she was a Jewish-American actress playing a Native American character, which reflects the complicated casting practices of the era that the film both challenged and perpetuated. Fact 4. Poitier edited the film. While starring in another movie, Sidney Poitier's schedule during 1971 was nothing short of superhuman. After wrapping principal photography on Buck and the Preacher in just 45 days, an impressively tight shooting schedule for any feature film, let alone a directorial debut, Poitier didn't take a break. Instead, he immediately jumped into acting duties on another major film called The Organization, the third movie featuring his iconic character, Virgil Tibbs, the Philadelphia detective he'd made famous in the Heat of the Night. But here's the remarkable part. While he was on set performing in The Organization during the day, Poitier was simultaneously editing Buck and the Preacher during his off hours. Film editing is an intensive, creative process that typically requires a director's full attention and concentration. Editors and directors normally spend weeks or even months in editing bays, carefully reviewing footage, making cuts, adjusting pacing, and shaping the final narrative structure of a film. Somehow, Poitier managed to divide his mental energy between inhabiting a character in front of the camera and making critical creative decisions about his own film behind the scenes. This juggling act speaks volumes about Poitier's work ethic and his absolute commitment to maintaining creative control over Buck and the Preacher. He wasn't about to hand over editing duties to someone else after fighting so hard to direct the film in the first place. The fact that he successfully completed both projects without either one suffering in quality is a testament to his remarkable discipline and stamina. Most actors turned directors ease into their new role gradually, but Poitier dove in headfirst, proving he could handle the demands of both crafts simultaneously. Fact 5. Poitier and Belafonte were born 9 days apart. The chemistry between Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte in Buck and the Preacher didn't come from nowhere. These two men shared a remarkable parallel journey that began before either of them became famous. Both were born in 1927, separated by just 9 days, making them almost exact contemporaries. But their similarities ran much deeper than birth dates. Both men were Caribbean immigrants navigating the complex racial landscape of mid-century America. Poitier was born in Miami, but raised in the Bahamas before moving to the United States as a teenager. Belafonte was born in Harlem to a Jamaican mother and spent significant time in Jamaica during his childhood. This shared Caribbean heritage gave them a unique cultural perspective that differed slightly from African Americans whose families had been in the United States for generations. Their paths first crossed in New York when both men were just 20 years old, long before Hollywood came calling. They met through the American Negro Theater, a groundbreaking theatrical company that provided performance opportunities for black actors at a time when mainstream theater largely excluded them. Neither had achieved any fame yet. They were just two young men with Caribbean accents and big dreams, working odd jobs and taking acting classes. From that early friendship grew a bond that would last decades, built on mutual respect, shared struggles, and a common commitment to civil rights activism. By the time they reunited for Buck and the Preacher in 1971, they had both become major stars, but their connection remained rooted in those early days of struggling together in New York. That authentic friendship translated into genuine on-screen chemistry that made their buddy dynamic feel natural and unforced. Fact 6. Ruby Dee played Poitier's wife for the third time. When Ruby Dee was cast as Ruth, the strong-willed wife of Poitier's character Buck, audiences who had followed both actors' careers might have experienced a strange sense of déjà vu. This wasn't the first time Dee had played Poitier's on-screen spouse. It wasn't even the second time. Buck and the Preacher marked the third film where these two talented actors portrayed a married couple, creating an unusual pattern in Hollywood casting. Their first pairing came in 1957's Edge of the City, a powerful drama about interracial friendship and labor union corruption in which Dee and Poitier played a working-class couple. 4 years later, they reunited for A Raisin in the Sun, the groundbreaking film adaptation of Lorraine Hansberry's play about a black family's struggles in Chicago, where they again portrayed husband and wife. Now, more than a decade after their first on-screen marriage, Buck and the Preacher brought them back together once more as a frontier couple fighting for survival in the post-Civil War West. This repeated casting created a kind of unintentional continuity across three very different films spanning different eras and genres. While it's not uncommon for actors to work together multiple times, playing the same relationship dynamic 3 times is relatively rare in Hollywood. The decision likely stemmed from the undeniable chemistry between Dee and Poitier, which felt authentic and lived in rather than artificially romantic. By the time Buck and the Preacher was filmed, they had such a natural rapport that their scenes together required little explanation. Audiences could believe they'd been together for years. Dee's performance in Buck and the Preacher was praised as scene-stealing, bringing emotional depth and strength to a character who could have been relegated to a typical supporting wife role. Fact 7. The original director was fired after 1 week. Joseph Sargent seemed like a logical choice to direct Buck and the Preacher when he was first hired. He was an experienced television director with a solid reputation, and within a few years he would go on to helm the taking of Pelham 123, one of the most acclaimed thrillers of the 1970s. But his tenure on Buck and the Preacher lasted barely longer than a standard work week. After approximately 5 to 7 days of shooting, Sargent was replaced by Sidney Poitier in what must have been an awkward and difficult situation for everyone involved. The firing wasn't about incompetence or unprofessional behavior, it was about perspective and vision. According to Poitier's own explanation, Sargent's approach lacked the important ethnic qualities that would allow black people and minorities in general to find in Buck and the Preacher a certain substance, a certain nourishment, a certain complement of the self. In simpler terms, Sargent was directing it like any other Western, focusing on genre conventions and action sequences, while Poitier and Belafonte wanted something deeper, a film that would speak authentically to black audiences about their history and struggles. Actor Cameron Mitchell, who played the villainous Deshay in the film, later commented that Sargent was shooting the picture like a TV show, suggesting a lack of cinematic ambition. Harry Belafonte was more direct in his assessment, stating that they might as well face it. They needed a black man for a sensitive job about black people. Interestingly, Sargent himself seemed to understand and accept the decision, reportedly telling Daily Variety that Poitier had breathed and lived with the film since its conception, making it rightfully his film. Fact 8. Jazz legend Benny Carter. Composed with blues icons, the soundtrack of Buck and the Preacher represents an unusual collaboration that brought together different corners of black American music. Benny Carter, a jazz legend whose career stretched back to the 1920s, composed the film's score, bringing his sophisticated understanding of jazz composition and arrangement to a Western setting. But rather than using a traditional orchestra to perform his music, Carter made an interesting choice. The soundtrack would be performed by blues musicians Sonny Terry, Brownie McGhee, and Don Frank Brooks, creating a unique fusion of jazz composition with blues performance style. Sonny Terry was famous for his distinctive harmonica playing, while Brownie McGhee was an acclaimed guitarist, and together they had formed one of the most successful blues duos in American music history. Their style was rooted in the acoustic blues tradition, with a folksy, down-home quality that felt organic and raw. Don Frank Brooks added another layer to this blues foundation. When Carter's jazz-influenced compositions were filtered through the blues sensibility of these performers, the result was a soundtrack, unlike anything typically heard in Western films. Instead of sweeping orchestral themes or the twangy guitar sounds common to the genre, Buck and the Preacher had a sound that felt distinctly African-American in its musical heritage, bluesy, soulful, and connected to the folk traditions of the South. Some critics and viewers found the score unusual, with the harmonica and blues elements standing out against expectations for Western music. But this unconventional approach perfectly matched the film's mission to tell a Western story from a black perspective, using musical traditions that were authentic to the character's cultural background, rather than adhering to established Western soundtrack conventions. Fact 9. Reviewers compared it to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. When Buck and the Preacher hit theaters in April 1972, film critics immediately reached for a specific comparison to help audiences understand what they were watching. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the hugely successful 1969 Western starring Paul Newman and Robert Redford. Multiple reviewers noted the similarities between the two films, with some calling Buck and the Preacher essentially Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid with a social conscience. The comparison made sense on several levels. Both films featured a buddy dynamic between two very different characters who develop an unlikely partnership, both had elements of comedy mixed with action, and both took a revisionist approach to the Western genre by subverting traditional expectations about heroism and morality. In Butch Cassidy, the heroes were charming outlaws who robbed banks and trains. In Buck and the Preacher, the heroes were also willing to rob banks when necessary to save their people, blurring the lines between lawfulness and survival. Both films ended with their protagonists facing overwhelming odds in dramatic final standoffs. The key difference, as critics noted, was that Buck and the Preacher centered black characters fighting against racial oppression, giving the film's outlaw actions a political dimension that Butch Cassidy lacked. While Newman and Redford were running from the law for personal gain, Poitier and Belafonte were fighting for the freedom and survival of an entire community of freed slaves. The comparison was both a compliment, linking the film to a beloved hit, and a recognition that Buck and the Preacher was attempting something more ambitious by combining entertainment with social commentary about African American history. Fact 10. The studio was tricked about Poitier directing. When Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte made the decision to fire Joseph Sargent, they faced a serious problem. Columbia Pictures had invested significant money in this production, and the studio executives might panic if they learned an untested first-time director would be taking over. So Poitier and Belafonte came up with a clever strategy that was part truth and part deception. According to production accounts, when they informed the Columbia executives about Sargent's departure, they carefully framed Poitier's assumption of directorial duties as a temporary measure. They explained that Poitier would direct only until the studio could find a suitable permanent replacement, making it sound like a short-term emergency solution rather than a long-term plan. The studio executives, reassured that they would eventually get an experienced director back at the helm, agreed to let Poitier continue filming. But here's the secret. Poitier and Belafonte never had any intention of finding a replacement director. The whole temporary arrangement story was a strategic fiction designed to buy time and avoid studio interference. As shooting continued and Poitier proved he could handle the job, the search for a replacement director somehow never materialized. By the time the studio executives realized what had happened, the film was already deep into production, with Poitier firmly in control. At that point, replacing him would have been more disruptive and expensive than simply letting him finish. The gambit worked perfectly, and Poitier completed his directorial debut without ever officially being hired as the film's permanent director. This bit of creative deception showed just how determined Poitier and Belafonte were to maintain control over their film's vision, even if it meant playing a bit of strategic theater with their own studio. Fact 11. Black extras were recruited from El Paso, Texas. Filming Buck and the Preacher in Durango, Mexico made financial sense and provided beautiful desert landscapes, but it created an unexpected casting problem for the production team. The story required dozens of extras to portray the freed slaves traveling west in wagon trains, but finding enough black actors in Mexico proved surprisingly difficult. Producer Joel Glickman and his team discovered that while there were Mexican citizens of African descent available, they didn't match what the filmmakers were looking for visually. According to production notes reported in Daily Variety in March 1971, Mexican citizens with African heritage just didn't look black enough for the film's needs. This blunt assessment reflected the filmmakers' concern about authenticity and the specific visual representation they wanted for formerly enslaved African Americans from Louisiana heading to Kansas. Rather than compromise on this vision, the production team came up with a logistically complex solution. They would recruit black extras from the United States and bring them across the border to Mexico. The production recruited more than 100 black American extras from El Paso, Texas, a border city close enough to Durango to make the transportation feasible. To this American contingent, they added black immigrants who had moved to Mexico from Cuba, Brazil, and other parts of Latin America, creating a diverse cast that still met their criteria. The decision sparked some controversy, with Mexican actors and crew members filing discrimination complaints arguing they were being underrepresented and underpaid on a production filming in their own country. These tensions highlighted the complicated intersection of authenticity, representation, and labor practices in international film production during the early 1970s. Fact 12. Buck uses sawed-off shotguns instead of traditional pistols. Western heroes typically carried revolvers, 6 shooters strapped to their hips in quick-draw holsters, ready for fast gunfights at high noon. Think of every iconic Western gunslinger from John Wayne to Clint Eastwood, and you'll picture men with pistols. But Sidney Poitier's character, Buck, breaks this visual convention in a surprising and memorable way. Instead of pistols, Buck carries 2 sawed-off shotguns holstered at his sides, creating a unique and somewhat intimidating silhouette. Sawed-off shotguns are shotguns that have had their barrels cut down to make them shorter and more portable, though this modification also makes them significantly more powerful and devastating at close range. When Buck pulls out his sawed-off shotguns during the film's action sequences, the result is dramatically different from typical Western gunfights. The weapons create disproportionately massive damage compared to pistol fire, with a spread of buckshot that's far more destructive than a single bullet. This choice wasn't just about looking different. It reflected Buck's practical, survival-focused mindset as a former Union Army cavalry sergeant who had seen real combat. He wasn't interested in fair fights or quick-draw showdowns. He was interested in protecting his people and staying alive by any means necessary. The sawed-off shotguns became a visual signature for the character, with multiple reviewers and fans commenting on how striking it was to see Sidney Poitier wielding these weapons in dramatic final shootouts. The image of Poitier with dual sawed-off shotguns has become one of the film's most iconic and frequently referenced visual elements, setting Buck apart from every other Western protagonist who came before him. Fact 13. The film depicts the real Exoduster migration. Buck and the Preacher isn't just a fictional Western adventure. It's based on a real historical movement that most Americans had never heard of when the film was released in 1972. The story dramatizes the Exoduster migration, a massive wave of African American migration that took place primarily around 1879, shortly after the end of Reconstruction. The term Exoduster was a reference to the biblical Exodus, with black Southerners seeing themselves as escaping bondage, much like the Israelites fleeing Egypt. Between 1879 and 1880, approximately 20,000 to 40,000 African Americans left the South and headed to Kansas, seeking the land and freedom that had been promised but never delivered after the Civil War. These migrants came primarily from Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee, fleeing the escalating racial violence, exploitative sharecropping systems, and broken promises of Reconstruction. They believed Kansas would offer them the opportunity to own land, farm independently, and build communities free from the terror of night riders and the Ku Klux Klan. Leaders like Benjamin Pap Singleton helped organize and promote this migration, encouraging black families to claim their stake in the American West. The reality was often harsher than the dream, with many exodusters arriving in Kansas destitute and facing harsh conditions. But the movement represented an act of self-determination and resistance that has been largely overlooked in traditional Western histories. Buck and the Preacher brought this forgotten chapter of American history to mainstream audiences, showing that the story of westward expansion wasn't exclusively white, and that black Americans fought their own battles for freedom on the frontier. Fact 14. It was the first major Western directed by a black filmmaker. When Buck and the Preacher was released in April 1972, it represented a genuine first in Hollywood history, a Western film directed by a black man and released by a major studio. While there had been independent black westerns made outside the studio system, and while Sidney Poitier himself had appeared as an actor in the Western Duel at Diablo in 1966, no African American had ever been given the director's chair for a major studio western before. This milestone went beyond simple representation. It meant that a black filmmaker would have creative control over how black history and black characters were portrayed in a genre that had traditionally either excluded African Americans entirely or relegated them to subservient, stereotypical roles. For decades, Hollywood westerns had perpetuated the myth that the American frontier was an exclusively white space, with cowboys, sheriffs, and pioneers all portrayed by white actors, despite the historical reality that approximately 1 in 4 cowboys was actually black. By directing Buck and the Preacher, Poitier was able to challenge these conventions from behind the camera, making decisions about framing, pacing, character development, and storytelling that centered black experiences rather than marginalizing them. The film's success opened doors, though slowly, for other black filmmakers to work in the Western genre. Poitier went on to direct 8 more films over the course of his career, including the hugely successful comedy Stir Crazy in 1980. But Buck and the Preacher remains historically significant as the film that proved a black director could handle a major Western production and deliver both critical respect and commercial viability. Fact 15. Poitier felt instant calm on his first day directing, taking over as director. Mid-production on your very first film would terrify most people, especially when you're also starring in the movie and have never been behind a camera professionally before. But Sidney Poitier experienced something unexpected when he finally stepped into the director's role on Buck and the Preacher, an immediate and surprising sense of calm. In later interviews and his autobiography, Poitier described the moment with remarkable clarity. He said, "I rolled my camera for the first time. I tell you, after 3 or 4 takes of that first scene, a calm came over me. A confidence surged through my whole body, and I, as green as I was, had a touch for this new craft I had been courting from a distance for many, many years." This wasn't false bravado or hindsight revision. People on set reportedly noticed the transformation too. Instead of the nervous energy you might expect from a first-time director, Poitier displayed a natural authority and decisiveness that suggested he'd been preparing for this moment his entire career. In a sense, he had been. Poitier explained that he'd spent years carefully observing his directors on previous films, studying their techniques, watching how they communicated with actors and crew, learning the language of filmmaking from the other side of the camera. Directors like Martin Ritt, Stanley Kramer, and Joseph Mankiewicz had all worked with Poitier, and he had absorbed their methods while building his acting career. So when the moment finally came to direct his own film, all that accumulated knowledge and observation clicked into place, creating an instinctive understanding of the craft that felt almost effortless.